Welcome back to The Report. In the past, scientists have portrayed the so-called ape-man, Homo erectus, to be an ape-like creature with a brain smaller than a human, feet with a grasping big toe for climbing in trees, and a large snout protruding like a chimpanzee. But more recently, these so-called scientists have reinterpreted this creature to be human-appearing, and some have gone so far as to rename it Homo sapiens. Now, recently, in the science journal Paleoanthropology, Boston University scientists estimated that Homo erectus was as large as 200 pounds. But how could these evolutionary scientists have gotten this so wrong, saying that it was ape-like, when in fact it was human? Our guest today is Dr. Carl Werner. He is the author and producer of Evolution, The Grand Experiment. It's a book and video series, and he just released 2 new books on the topic of human evolution. One of those is entitled 9 Categories of Overturned Ape Men. Actually, I've got an autographed copy right here. I know you're jealous. You got to go out and pick one up. Dr. Werner, with his medical background, has expertly researched the topic of human evolution and recently documented more than 100 frauds in the field of human evolution in his video series. Dr. Werner, welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's great to be with you, David, and your audience. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So explain to me, based on this new report and your research, how exactly did evolutionary scientists mischaracterize the Homo erectus as more ape-like than he actually was? And why would that be?
Well, in 1896, Dr. Eugene Du Bois found a skull cap. Now, the skull cap is only the very top of the skull. He also found a single molar tooth, and he found an upper leg bone on Java Island, Indonesia. This creature was eventually named Homo erectus, or the Java man. Dr. Du Bois did not find any facial bones, foot bones, or hand bones, but he imagined that these missing bones were ape-like. 4 years later, in 1900, he presented to the public a life-size model of Homo erectus at the World's Fair in Paris with an ape-like protruding snout, even though it did not have any facial bones, an ape-like big toe separated from the rest of the foot, even though he did not have any foot bones, and large ape-like fingers, even though he did not have any hand bones. Then 15 years later, the curator at the famous American Museum in New York City, Dr. H.F. Osborne, published a picture of Homo erectus that looked like a chimpanzee. It too had a chimpanzee-like head, a large protruding snout, and large ape-like hands. You see, both Dr. Du Bois and Dr. Osborne based their interpretation of Homo erectus on bones that had not been found. They only had 3 bones. You see, Homo erectus was completely speculative at that point.
So you're telling me that this whole image of this ape-like creature was developed from 3 bones, most of those which gave us no indication on what most of it was actually shaped like.
That's exactly right. It's crazy.
So talk a little bit about how the face of Homo erectus was misconstrued over the years.
Well, as I said, for the first 90 years, scientists didn't have any facial bones, and they assumed Homo erectus had a protruding ape-like snout. Then in 1984, everything changed. Richard Leakey found a nearly complete skeleton of Homo erectus at Lake Turkana, Kenya, which he called the Turkana boy. Yeah. Now, not only was it a complete skeleton, but also the skull was also nearly complete, including the facial bones. But here is where the story gets really interesting, David. Richard Leakey, with this complete skull, moved the facial bones on the Turkana boy skull outward to make it have a more protruding ape-like snout. I emailed him and I confronted him about this, and he admitted to me that he had wrongly placed the face on the skull in the ape position. You see, you can see this in my video series, which is available in the Creation Superstore on your website.
Absolutely. And it's shocking. But again, this would actually be not just a mistake if it's being reshaped. Skulls are being reshaped, things are being changed like this and portrayed in ways that the evidence doesn't suggest. That almost appears to be fraud, doesn't it?
Well, what was completely fraud was that the photograph that he supplied to the public and to his colleagues was photoshopped, and he photoshopped where the spacers were, where the plaster was. And when you actually photograph the original skull, which Debbie and I did, and compare it to his photograph, you can see exactly what was photoshopped. So that part of it was definitely fraud.
Yeah, so Dr. Werner, today you've got people just adding on names to all these supposed ape-like ancestors. You know, it's Homo erectus, this and that and the other. And then sometimes they have multiple names, which makes it all the more confusing. But how do museums, to this day, portray Homo erectus? And do they still portray this thing like the early ape-like imagery that was put forth by Dr. Du Bois?
No, today museums portray Homo erectus as a modern human being. And many evolution scientists have renamed Homo erectus as Homo sapiens, the same species as us, modern humans. That's evolution scientists.
Wow. Wow. So that would indicate that there's not this ape-like ancestry, this transitional form turning from ape to human over long periods of time. And then Homo erectus, now again, you mentioned just a second ago, alluded to this. You've got two species names, Homo erectus, you've got Homo sapiens, and then are there any other species names that have been assigned to this particular creature?
Hold on to your seats. Evolution scientists have assigned more than 40 species names to this creature, which is in violation of the international rules for naming fossils. You can only give one species name to one type of creatures. The evolution scientists do this so they can claim that they have found a new species of ape-man. Mm-hmm. Some people today call these fossils Homo erectus, others call them Homo ergaster, others call them Homo pekinensis, Pithecanthropus erectus, Homo soloensis, etc. 47 species names were given to Homo erectus, and now today, some evolution scientists say they are Homo sapiens.
My goodness gracious. All of these different names for what started on the Isle of Java with 3 bones. And I understand that more pieces have been found over the years, but it's still shocking that they would create so much to do about so little, something that doesn't appear to be a transitional species at all. Now, when we think about Homo erectus fossils, Dr. Werner, they seem to have been, some of them, hidden from the public and from other scientists that might have gotten a fair share, might have spotted errors before they were perpetuated by universities and other professors. How did that contribute to keeping this whole ape-man myth alive?
This is a recurring story that the evolution scientists who say they found an ape-man then won't let their colleagues see it. For example, Eugene Du Bois found these 3 bones in 1896. Then he hid them during the most important first 25 years. He returns from Java Islands to the Netherlands and goes to his house, hides these 3 bones under the floorboards of his kitchen for a number of years. It won't let anybody see it. Then he moves them from the kitchen to the vault at the Haarlem Museum in Netherlands. Again, the scientists are not allowed to see it. And even today, the Turkana boy, evolution scientists can't get access to it. Richard Leakey, before he died, and when I interviewed him, says he is not allowed to view the skull. And when we were there, we were not allowed to assemble the skull, lower jaw to the head, because if you did, you'd realize the face was pulled out. So this lack of access shows that this is not science. It's just like a game, a game of moving shells around.
Absolutely. You know, here at the Wonder Center, we do have the Java Man Cafe, where every cup of coffee has an educational sticker telling the story of this supposed ape-like ancestor, trying to dispel these myths. Dr. Werner, thank you so much for being on the program today. You got to go check it out. His new book, Human Evolution, The Grand Experiment, 9 categories of overturned ape men. I will see you on another episode, Carl.
Thank you. Good to be with you guys.
Thank you so much. And we have plenty more to cover on tonight's show, so I want you to stick around because we'll be right back with viewer voices after the break.